So welcome to the first of the, I think, the 6 bootcamp sessions today. The opening session then, and in this session we're going to be talking about. It sounds quite simple, but why do companies form captives? And as a result of those motives, what kind of structures might we see forming out of that? We've got a couple of slides, not many, I would say. So hopefully this can be interactive and we can have some questions and a bit more conversational than us just standing and talking to you. So just by way of introduction, I'm Owen Williams from AXA XL, Global Programme and Captive Regional Director for the UK. Bit of a mouthful, apologies. And my partner in crime here, Charlotte Proctor from, I get this right, Client Service Director, Aon Guernsey. And also I'll point out, prior to Aon, some of you may know, 12 years, I believe, is that right? 14 years within the risk management function at BP. So good experience both from the captive management side, but also on the client side. So let's see if I can make the slides work. Oh. Right. So let's just start by, I guess, addressing a very simple question. And the reason we're doing this is because, excuse me, if you're an experienced practitioner, but you're probably in the wrong room, you should be next door. So the idea here is we do some real sort of base setting around the subject. So, you can all read the slides. I won't do the discourtesy of reading that out. But when we talk about a captive, people start talking about cells and single parent and segregated cells, and it can all get a bit complicated. In reality, I would say that is the minutiae of the detail. The principle of a captive is simply it's an insurance or a reinsurance entity set up to write the risks of its parent. It's a regulated entity, it's a capitalised entity, but really, above all, it's just a mechanism for you to retain risk in your business. It really is that simple. I would say within that, and there's an important detail there, you are retaining the risk in your corporate when you write it into a captive. You're not passing it to a third party, you're not taking it away from your corporation, you are actively choosing to retain that risk. And I'll say this in case there is a experienced practitioner in the room who points this out. A captive can write third-party risk. It doesn't have to only write the risk of the parent company. But when you get down to the kind of the ethos of a captive, it is purest sense. That's what a captive is. It's an entity, a reinsurance or an insurance entity set up to write the risk of the parent. And the whole conversation around writing third-party risk, I mean, once you start to write third-party risk into a captive, you really are veering more into, this is becoming more of a traditional insurance or reinsurance company. So, we wanted to talk a little bit about, why do people set up captives and how do they use them? So we did a bit of a brainstorm on this. We did a bit of a brainstorm, listing out all these different reasons why people choose to form captives, and really they came into 2 kind of principal buckets, let's call them. So we put here strategic, but think of this as the more traditional reasons for forming a captive. So if you cast your mind back, probably 3 years ago now, we didn't have a hard market. When I say this as an insurer, you could probably buy capacity from us fairly cheaply, but that didn't stop people forming captives, right? Because it's not all about, hey, I can buy this cheaper in the market. So if you look at the current captives that exist, the vast majority have been created as strategic risk management tools. So that's really about managing your total cost of risk. It's not just about I can save a few dollars over here by doing this. It's really about managing total cost of risk, taking an appropriate corporate level retention that might not be appropriate for every bit of your business. Your your company in wherever it might be, Argentina, might not be able to take a 10 million retention, but corporately you can, and a captive is a great vehicle to smooth that across your business. And that whole, let's call it the more strategic route into a captive, very long term, it's not and it was touched on in the earlier sessions, a captive is not just a hard market ploy, it's not just a short-term ploy, it's very long-term thinking, because certainly if you're putting long-term liability risks in there, once you're in, you're in it for some time. So this whole original, let's call it, methodology around it was not, I think there was a question earlier here today about, the dollar payoff, basically, about taking risk in and the administrative cost. And, we had a long time of soft market, and frankly, you could buy capacity quite cheaply. And I suspect that many people who owned captives were not doing it for the simple monetary saving piece. It was much more about management and control of their risk over the long term, over the cycle, than it was about a reactionary play. And when you think about the structures, the insurance structures and captive structures that lent itself to, and therefore the vast majority of the historical structures, you see a lot of large premium, low volatility risks. So people taking out primary slugs on their placements, particularly stuff that's very modelable, so lots of claims history in there. You have great deal of predictability, great deal of certainty around your captive result. Any of those kind of structures, taking attrition out of the market, moving it into a captive at a cheaper expense ratio than you're going to get from a commercial insurer, but very predictable, very modelable, understandable risk. Then you kind of flip forward a bit and you look at, okay, where we are now and what we're seeing now, and that much more, I would describe as reactionary motivation. So the reactionary motivation is, and apologies as an insurer I say this, but when you look at what you as clients have had to endure through the last sort of 2 years, it's tough, right? You've got rates going through the roof, just the pricing piece. Beyond simply getting rates going through the roof, sometimes you're struggling just to get capacity, just to get a deal home. So what that has led to is I would say, people looking to form captives in a much quicker manner, hence the conversation about sales, which we'll talk about shortly, but also in terms of the risks that people are putting into the captives and how they're putting them in, it has changed. So I think the difference between, let's say, 3 years ago and now is people are really doing it out of necessity, and it's an immediate necessity. It's, I can't get cyber coverage in the market, I can't get PI coverage in the market, or I can, but it's just prohibitively expensive. So people are doing that in a much shorter time frame, and there's the whole debate around feasibility studies, etc. And it does. How shall I put this? My hope is that I'm a big believer in captives. That's my role, and when we work with captives and have done for many years. But my hope is that the feasibility studies that are happening now are being done with the long term in mind, and not just what is happening now, because it's a market, and I think there was a comment earlier, and it will change. That's the reality. The market has always done this, so it will change. But I hope the decisions being made now are being made with more of a long-term view than just the immediate reaction. But what this change in dynamic has driven is a change in the risks and the structures that we're seeing clients utilising their captives for. So whereas in the past you would see, certainly I would see, clients tending to take slugs of primary, all that attrition, all that nice, easily modelable risk, we're now seeing clients saying, actually, I can't get my tower home, so I'm coming in on an excess placement, a high volatility, low premium excess placement. We're seeing clients, instead of just taking the primary out, saying, okay, I'm going to take quota share throughout throughout the whole program. So I'm going to write whatever it might be, 50% of my risk. And then we're also seeing people, particularly I'd say on large towers in property, if they can't get the whole tower home, just basically saying, okay, I've got a number that I'm going to go to, and if I can't get it home, then I'm going to plug my captive in and just take small shares, whatever I need, just to get my layers home. And it's kind of acting as a backstop to what basically can't be achieved in a sensible manner in the market. So very, very different sort of mentality. And then I'd say on the kind of more extreme end of that mentality, we're seeing a few where actually clients are saying, okay, well, I can buy portions of my, we love to badge, cyber, for example, but actually cyber's got a number of different aspects within it. The same goes to property, etc. And saying I can buy portions of that risk in the market, but there's certain perils that are really prohibiting the market from coming to play in a sensible manner in terms of financials. So we're seeing people carving out perils within specific risks and just putting all of that into the captive and then leaving the market to play on other aspects. So a real change in mentality. And then I've also seen as well, and there was a comment earlier on PI, which is obviously particularly challenged. We're certainly seeing that people are saying, okay, maybe I'll take all of my PI risk into the captive. So, and I think that, again, is a change in dynamic. And all I would comment around those are structures built by necessity, perhaps, rather than desirability. So it doesn't mean that they're wrong, it doesn't mean that they're bad, but there is a need to go into that with eyes wide open as to what you are getting into. Particularly, I would comment when I see sort of long tail lines going in, because if you think about go back to the motivation, if your motivation is I have a problem here and now, captive can solve that, absolutely. But there is risk that goes with it, and on a long tail line, it's not I'm going to dive in now and then the market's changed in 2 years, I'm back out again. It's not really a viable approach. Trying to think what else we have on slides. Okay, I think I'm passing over at this point to my esteemed colleague to talk through some of the coverages in a captive.
Thank you, Owen. Cheers. So, you've done it for me. Thank you. Obviously, when you're talking about your coverages, we have what we call the historic vanilla, which you'll hear about a lot, that most of the captives start with, which is what Owen was referring to earlier. So your property damage and your BI, your construction. And as I looked at this list, I went through it and thought, actually, I've missed about 3 or 4 that immediately come to mind. Terrorism, TRIA in the US, TRIA is in a number of captives, a lot of them. Medical malpractice is in some captives as well. And this has been going on historically for quite some time. So these are just here to give you a flavour of the sort of standard things that people have been putting in their captive. And I also put bloodstock as well, because that one's been going forever. So, there's lots of different coverages. And actually, the way you should probably think about a captive is, your businesses have lots of different issues. Always think about, is that a risk that we could deal with? Could we deal with it a different way? Would it fit in the captive? Is it uninsurable? Is it insurable? Let's think about that and where the best place is for us to retain this risk, or do we absolutely need to put it in the market with maybe AXA XL or whoever, or Zurich or whoever. More recently, and employee risk benefits is on the top over there, and I keep thinking, well, that's not so recent anymore. That's been going quite some time, actually. But, once you start to expand a captive and you've got comfortable, there are ways in which to diversify the risk portfolio that you have. And so, for example, you put the employee risk benefits in as well. Smaller risk, attritional risk, but at the same time, a very important risk to corporates. And so that would be a life cover, medical, possibly, long-term disability, noting, of course, the long-term nature of the tail in there. And quite recently, we've been seeing a lot more non-damage BI. And of course, as everybody is talking about, cyber is of the moment, and directors and officers. There's a session on both of those later on, but on directors and officers, it's always quite a tricky one. It's whether you want to have that side A in or not. To date, the captives that I've been looking at tend to have focused on side C, just as a bit of an example there. Parametric solutions, windstorm, these are the very straightforward covers, but these are, there's an event, you hit a certain level and you get a payout. It's not an indemnity cover like a lot of the insurances, most insurances in fact. And on that, what you will find, and this is something that Owen and I were discussing before, is quite a lot of the insurers actually want to write that only really as a reinsurance of a captive. So your captive can help that way as well. Crime, not sure that one should be in that list. I think it's been going a while, but we had a debate on that one. Product recall, and more recently, we're seeing, this push to get environmental. There's remediation risks in some captives as well, and some of them have been writing that for years, but there is a push to drive the ESG, which I'll come on to actually in the opportunities. Just one thing, pretty much a captive can write anything an insurer can write, subject to its license and subject to its capitalisation and subject really to the appetite that you have to take that risk onto your balance sheet. Okay, right now I've got to find out where this is. So the opportunities and innovations, and I'm sure there are tons of these that I've missed because there's just things coming through the pipe all the time. The new business that people are seeing across the board is incredible at the moment. Everybody is looking at their captives in different ways. Some are writing maybe just 3 lines, some are writing a across the board program from day one. So there's a real sort of, different appetite going on. When we look at the opportunities and innovations, think of this as, this is your problem-solving tool that you have in the group from a risk management point of view. This is really something that you should be thinking of as, what can I do with it? So I think of it, the ways that these captives can help in 3 ways. There's the coverage issues, the capacity issues, accessing capacity, and also the risk management within groups. And that's probably from my background. I just, always thinking of the parent. And that's the way I've been trained up. So new and unusual risks. So the example here tends to be new tech. If you've got a piece of new tech, quite often the market don't really like it. You can argue with me on that, Owen, if you like. But that tends to be something where you might just want to take a piece into your captive to get used to the risk. And then that develops the confidence in the risk. And you may even build a market out of that, hopefully, once you've got the data, the experience, and the numbers behind what you're writing and the history. Broader coverage, you touched on earlier, actually. There are some things that in this hard market, it's not just the price that's going up, the coverages tend to go a little bit like that. And we're also, as you said, seeing infill layers. Captives are not just being used for that primary layer, you're seeing them all over the place. Example that comes to my mind was wildfire liability, and effectively that particular captive writes all over the programme, just leveraging the right positions on the programme for the corporate. Another thing that we're seeing a lot of at the moment is this accessing of the multi-year, multi-lines and the sweet spot, and really optimising your position where you are transferring risk into the market and really, choosing that right point. And there's a lot of that going on at the moment. I mentioned parametric, and that is something that we are seeing more of. But from my point of view as an ex-risk manager, the things that I found that came out of captives were the data and understanding risk to be shared back with the group. We call it feedback loops, or we used to, and the feedback loop into your corporate is very valuable. Funnily enough, sometimes the captive, once it's been there for a few years, has the best data in the group, quite frankly, and can be used to map out risk, fed in. It's amazing what the captives do actually produce in this result. The other one, bursaries, driving risk management, giving back to your group, driving your group's risk management process, making them, giving something back. There's a lot of this on the employee benefit side of things. We see, from the healthcare point of view, and the wellness programs. But you ultimately, it is possible that you could be driving your own green agenda. The fact that you may be charging more for some risks and less for others, and really driving that agenda into your group, because you are the ones, once you have the risks in your captive, that are looking at those risks on a regular basis, and you have that information at your fingertips to share with your group. So I've gone on a bit about that. And of course, it dawned on me, and I didn't know anyone was going to mention cells earlier. But we are seeing a lot of cells at the moment as well. And they are, I suppose, it's not always about whether you're in a hurry, but they are easier to put down. The capital isn't required. Just closing the risk gap really is something that you need to do. They're quicker to set up, they're more cost effective, but they are quite often being used for very reactionary type risks. Perhaps if you can't complete a placement, you think, oh, right, if I could just get into the reinsurance market, then I could complete that placement. So you're seeing that as well. But cells are used for a number of things. Your risk retention, similar, in fact, the same way as a captive. Reinsurance market access, fronting solutions as well around the world. Sometimes you have difficulty with the local insurers and you need something else to help you out. And also warehousing of that long-term risk. Some of the warehousing if you want to segregate and move out your risk, warehousing is something that cells can do for you, or R&Q do it as well. And then the pre-authorised cells there are a number of cells that are on a quick access at the moment in Guernsey with the regulator. I would say the due diligence around them means the quickest turnaround is probably a month. It's not the GFSC per se, it's actually the due diligence that goes around this. Counterparty due diligence is something we're all familiar with at the moment, and it tends to slow everything down a bit. So if you're thinking of setting up a captive, give time for that. Everybody's got counterparty due diligence, the banks, the managers, and so forth. So really, I see the cells as possibly a stepping stone to the captives, but also a very quick mechanism if you've got something that's really burning on your mind and you need to sort out for your businesses. So I think enough from us. And if you've got any questions afterwards, please shout up and come and see us and let us know. But I'm now going to move over to my fellow Guernsey cohort, which is Adele and Richard, and they are going to talk you through what do the managers really do. Because if you've never had a captive manager, you probably won't know yet.